Hey guys, we're looking at the solar eclipse that was at 2 degrees of Scorpio. Firstly, I'm going to read what Scorpio, what the archetype means, but also if you see my chart here, you want to look at your own chart because the solar eclipse would happen in a particular house for you, and it can be quite defining, and I'll show you why. With the rising sign time, because the rising sign changes every 2 hours. So let me show you here. We've got this going on that if I get my pointer, and you will see spotlight, there you go. So see here that this is my 11th house, the cusp. So the sun at 2 degrees and the moon at 2 degrees, which it would have been conjunct at the time, would have been just here. So it's just in my 11th house in Scorpio. And I'll explain what that means in a moment. But first of all, if we look at with evolutionary astrology and the archetype generally, if we look at astrology anywhere in the world, people will have an understanding. There's been input and then we put output. So Scorpio keywords are where it's commitment, it's fear of entrapment, it's where we can spy, betrayal, compulsions, shared resources, very important, and resourcefulness, power and powerlessness. It can be corrupt power, obsessions, and I have a lot to say about corrupt power. I'm sure many of us do. Obsessions, fear of vulnerability, fear of intimacy. It's to do with the sexual side of being human as well. Loss, abandonment, it's where we merge, metamorphosis. It's what we look at that's taboo or what we consider to be taboo. It's darkness, it can be phobias, paranoia. It's intensity, it can be fascination, being fascinated with something, like being fascinated with astrology as an example, or fascinated with mathematics, or fascination with anything that we have a deep, intense fascination for. It's psychology, psychological. It can also be considered to be evil and destruction, and the priest and the priestess. And shared resources is a big one here with what's going on globally. I see, particularly in my opinion, we've had some new movement in power and control today with different leaders and whatever. So it's just interesting when we understand cycles and what's going on. I will show you also, this is interesting thing about eclipses. So we're having a solar eclipse, and then on the 8th of November, we'll have a lunar eclipse. So let me do this. So if you can see, I'll make sure I'm sharing the right page. So let's see here. Okay, so if we go back to today's solar eclipse, if we look at today's solar eclipse, we're looking at this particular, they're called Saros cycles. And the cycle that's happening today is here, and it's cycle 124. It's a way of that's been figured out by mathematicians over the hundreds and hundreds of years, even longer. The last cycle was October the 14th, 2004. So if I go back to now, how old I am, and I go back 18 years, I would have been 38 at the time. So if I look at what was going on for me personally, I can see the cycle. So the next one would be, the one today is October the 25th, 2022. And then the next one is November the 4th, 2040, in this Saros cycle 124. If we also look at this, it's quite important that you know that you can go to AstroSeek /. So it's astro/seek.com. You can see it, astro/seek.com, and you can bring up your own chart. This is a brilliant site, and I would highly recommend it. The other one that I use is my astro.com. But then what I do is I also use SolarFire when I'm reading charts with people, because it gives a lot more understanding that we can move the chart around. So as that's happened in my 11th house, before I go over to SolarFire and talk about the eclipses and the meaning, the 11th house, which I'm reading to you now, is it rules friendships, and it's also when you spend time, it's a new moon, ultimately it's a new moon, so it's new beginnings as well. So a solar eclipse in the 11th house, it's where you can feel more honest, because it's also the 11th house is our hopes and dreams, so it's about friendships and acquaintances, and it's also where you can endear people to you. With close friends, you may find yourself more emotional than normal. So that's a possibility if you have a new moon there generally, but also a solar eclipse plays out over 6 months, eclipses and the lunar eclipses as well. It says that with close friends, you may find yourself more emotional than normal. It's social and personality and personally and professionally. And it's about broadening networks of friends and business associates, and it can bring in some prosperity. But with that, I'm also going to slightly take into the 12th, because my 12th house begins at 4 degrees there of Scorpio. So my 12th house begins at 4 degrees of Scorpio. So one could take into account some of the 12th house traits as well. However, I think I'd like to stick with the 11th house, because the 12th house is a whole different thing. And it's also where helping other causes as well, and one-to-one attention rather than one-to-one attention. So it could be more of me looking at, helping people more, not so much on a one-to-one attention, but more like this, this reaches more people. So it's about exploring dreams that can come in, and they can come into focus. And it's where you're reevaluating your future hopes and dreams, and also making changes and to commit further to some. So we can see that's for me. But if you wanted to look, if you know where that eclipse is falling, just Google, solar eclipse in the 9th house, if it's in the 9th or the 1st. Google is fantastic for that stuff, and you can find out more about what that means for you. The sun is conjunct the moon. When we have this, it's a new moon. The sun is also conjunct Mercury. So at this point, I would prefer to go back to this chart. And this is astro-seek.com that I was discussing with you. And then we begin to look at the aspects of what's going on with the collective chart here, which is really what we're looking at. It's like we can know in our own lives, but what's happening collectively. When we see this beginning of this chart, because it's traditional, it's starting at 0 degrees Aries. So we're looking at the aspects and what aspects are quite strong. So we can see here we have an inconjunct Mars to Pluto, which is quite a difficult aspect. And Mars is going to go retrograde. So that will go retrograde in the coming days, and on the 30th of this month. And when Mars goes retrograde, we're going inward. So we have to deal with that energy inwardly and look after ourselves. So for me, I'm starting to do some more exercise and stuff like that, so that I'm working that energy off, so that I'm not, that I can manage that sort of. Mars is like wants to go outwards, and if we can't do that, it can be very frustrating for us, and that frustration can then be projected onto other people. And however, that Mars can be used creatively, and that's what we want to do. But we're talking about the eclipse. I did a Mars video yesterday. If you go to my channel, go back to the video yesterday and you'll see. So a solar eclipse here, as we can see, is conjunct the moon, and then it's also conjunct Venus, and it's also conjunct to the south node. So we've got a lot going on up there. It's moving in. The Venus is more in line with that conjunction to the south node there. If you look here, we've got the sun at 2 degrees Scorpio, we've got the moon at 2 degrees Scorpio, and then we've got Venus is at 2 degrees, and that's moving into that node, that south node, or they're moving together. But the node moves slowly because it takes 18 years to go around the chart this way, and all of the planets move around the chart that way. Then we've got Jupiter's just, if we look at Jupiter, it's just at 0 degrees retrograde of Aries, and that's going to go back into Pisces for some months before it goes forward again, but I'll show you that too. So eclipses, a new moon it's about a new chapter in our lives, and it's also, it strongly affects our personality, because the sun, it's like where we shine, and it's where we can learn to get to know ourselves better. But it also can be a difficult time because we may have to make difficult decisions. So whilst it's new and new is good, it can be a time of reevaluating things, you know, what we're not dealing with, what we don't want to deal with anymore. And it's also that we're leaving behind, and it can be something, you know, painful as well to leave behind. It may be that we're going to, you know, stop doing a habit, or we're going to decide that we're leaving a job or something like that, and we're starting something fresh as well. But there's support there. When the lunar eclipse happens on the 8th of November, this is about where relationships become important. But this, I would say, the eclipse, the solar eclipse, is about our personality more than the moon is about our others and our egocentric relationships, egocentricity as well. It's very deep. The moon is very different from the sun, though, in that respect. And so a new moon solar eclipse is also looking at what the aspects it's making to our chart, and that will also tell us what's going on. So we want to look at what house it falls in, and then whether it's aspecting other planets in our chart. So let's go back to mine. And if we look, you know, what is that moon and sun doing to my chart? We'd be looking for oppositions. We'd be looking for, you know, squares. What is it doing? Here it's for me, it's hitting my Pluto and Uranus, and that's called a 45-degree angle, and that's a semi-square. That's what I'm trying to say. It's a semi-square, but then it's doing other things too. If we go down here, we can see that it's hitting, if we take it from the beginning of Scorpio, we can see that that would be a trine. So this would be a trine, and we have an opposition. There's lots of different angles going on here for all of us. And Jupiter will be going direct on November the 23rd. Let's see, Jupiter retrograde, actually. Maybe I'll get that wrong. It's Jupiter went retrograde on July 28th, 2022 at 8 degrees Aries, and it's moving back into Scorpio to 28 degrees. And I guess it goes direct on November the 23rd, but we'll look at that. October the 23rd, Saturn went retrograde on June the 4th, and it went direct on October the 23rd. I want to say that correctly, that Saturn went retrograde on June the 4th, 2022, and it went direct on October 23rd, 2022. Uranus doesn't go direct until the new year, and which will be in January. And then we have Neptune will go direct on December the 4th. And then Pluto went direct on October the 8th. And Chiron will go direct on December the 23rd. So I hope that's useful. When we're looking at the nodes, I'm going to go over to Solar Fire here now. I'm going to share Solar Fire. New share. So you can see here. Also, I had a dream that I'd seen the solar eclipse, which was really interesting. I didn't see it. I didn't go out looking for it today. But last night I had a dream that I was in an older place somewhere in my past that related to childhood in a way. But I was an adult in the dream, and I was in this property, and I came out of the property, and it was busy in the property, whatever was going on, but I wasn't very aware. I could see people, but not see faces. And when I came out, I looked into the distance and upwards, and there were buildings, lots of buildings, but in the distance, there was a steeple that caught my eye, a steeple. I don't know if it was a church, but it was a steeple. And as I looked at the steeple, the sun was above the steeple, and I was looking at it directly in my dream, and the moon had not bitten in, but that little bit of partial solar eclipse I could see. And then what I did was I went and got went back inside the property. I got my iPhone, And then I took a picture of the image I saw, and then I woke up. The interesting thing is that image has been in my mind all day. So I don't, dreams are quite interesting because people can say, oh, it means this and it means that, but they're so personal to ourselves. And although we can try and glean stuff from it. Like, what does a steeple mean? What does an eclipse mean? You know, what does it mean that I looked at it directly? A lot going on there. When we look at the idea of, you know, if we look now, let's get the pointer again here, spotlight. So when we get this, we can, I'm going to move this chart forward. So we know that this is conjunct. You can see 2 degrees, 2 degrees. Venus is involved. And when we look at some of these aspects, which I'm going to do as I go through, which will be helpful. And I'm going to read some of these I printed off from AstroSeek as well, which I showed you the chart just a moment ago. So this happened in the UK, GMT at 12:01. Universal time would have been 11:01 a.m. So you can figure out wherever you are in the world what time that would have been for you. But generally, if you're in New York, it would have been 5 hours behind, and if you're in California, 8 hours behind, and then ahead in Australia. So what we have is that the sun was conjunct the moon. We know this, okay? Sun conjunct moon. Let me move something. Sun conjunct moon, and Venus conjunct the sun is, when we have this aspect is highlighting the feminine characteristic of both sexes. And it also supports artistic and creative inclinations. It's where we are optimistic, and also that we have it's good taste, you know, when the sun is good. So if you have this aspect in your chart, then you may know that anyway. The sun is trying to Mars at that point when it happened. So the sun was trying to Mars. So you can see that the Mars is here and the sun is trying. And this is a harmonious aspect, and this gives the desire to set objectives and the ability to reach goals. And it's also assertive energy, and it's competitiveness, but it can also create impatience as well when the sun is trying to Mars. The sun square Pluto, so this is a big one for us because Pluto is going to be moving out of Capricorn in 2023 in March, and then it will go retrograde again. So it's going to go into Aquarius, which is huge for humanity because the last time it did that was 240 odd years ago. Then it will go back into retrograde back around May time, I believe, or double check, in to the sign of Capricorn. I think it does that twice. So that time and then another time, and then it moves directly into, I think, 2024. And then it will remain in Aquarius for 20 years. And that's been huge, that Pluto. It's breaking down the idea of patriarchal rule. I'm sort of not into that word so much now because I think we're going into a new time. There will be fracturing as that occurs as it moves into Aquarius. So the fracturing is already occurring. It's not like some shock thing where there's fracturing taking place. It's where people are going their own way. They're making their own choices because people were forced into, during lockdowns and that period of time, being forced into making decisions that they would never have had to make in a lifetime before. Which way, how do I want to live? People are looking at food, they're looking at their resources, and we're looking at, because of this aspect here with Uranian energy conjunct the North Node, this is very, to me, it feels like a positive aspect to me because it's something's wanting to change, something's wanting to give. This Saturn, which is restriction, square to the Uranian energy, and then Aquarius as well, but Pluto, Aquarius, it's all ties in. So the Sun square, the Pluto at this time during this eclipse is where people can tell, it's like authority where it can create stubbornness, and Sun square Pluto, where they tell others what to do and people try and persuade other people to change their behavior. And this is where it can create profound change, but you know, the death of something. And that word is also, it's very uncomfortable word, but it's human, that everything comes to pass, everything that exists will be non-existent one day. And that's a scary word for human beings, but it's a what, you know, it's a word that needs to be explored. What does it mean to us? And in that, what does it mean to our own lives, and what does it mean to our relationships and what goes on around us? Because there's a huge reality going on right now around that word and around that subject that is not being, there's not enough transparency around it at the moment. And I'm sure it depends what news you follow, or whether you follow mainstream media, or whether you follow people on YouTube, and the understanding of what's gone on and what's been happening. The European Commission held a case last week that's looking at particular pharmaceutical companies as an example of what's been going on with stuff that's being sold and money being spent. So I'm trying to say things without going in too deep there. But there's a brilliant guy. If you want to tap into a bit more of what I'm trying to say there, look at John Campbell on YouTube. And he's been a doctor who's been giving data all the way through the COVID period. So that's worth looking at to educate yourself on what's been going on. So the Sun square Pluto can be about manipulation. And it's interesting today that on this, we've had a new Prime Minister in the UK. What's very interesting about people being leaders is, with currently what's going on, it's not really the people that are choosing at this time. It seems to me that the choices are being made within governmental structures themselves, that there are lots of choices that are not being made by humanity. So the moon conjunct Mercury, not the moon, so look, we've got the moon is, although it's 22 degrees Mercury, which will be moving into Scorpio, that moon, it's still within orb. It's 10 degrees away, but Mercury moves quite quickly in the sense that it takes 88 days around the chart. The moon takes 28 days, the sun a year, Venus 224 or 26 days, if I recall. The nodes are 18 years round clockwise. The Pluto 240 years, roughly. And Saturn is 29 and a half years. Neptune, I believe, is 184 or 164. Let me get my years right. Jupiter is 12. Chiron, which is the wounded healer, is 49 to 51 years. Again, the node, 18 years. And Uranus is 84 years. Mars, 2 years. And these planets here, I'm going to, this is Lilith here going on here, but I won't go into that. And Lilith has 4 different aspects to Lilith, which is a very interesting archetype to look at. So the moon conjunct Venus is where we're naturally charming, naturally charming, and it can open doors and places that would otherwise, you'd need a lot of experience to enter, basically. You would otherwise enter only with a lot of experience. So that's very useful to have that aspect. And it's where a love of luxury and pleasant aspects of life. So it's interesting what's gone on today. Mars, moon, the moon is trine Mars here as well. The moon is trine to Mars. So when it's a new moon, they're both doing the same thing, yeah? We have Mercury square Pluto. This aspect is thinking in such a way that where it can be dominated by opinions and instincts, and that Mars going retrograde is going to do that as well. It's about opinions as well. But the moon brings in the instinctual. Mercury, Pluto, sorry, the moon up here as well, but that's involved in that squaring Pluto. It can be biased thinking with the Mercury square Pluto. And also it can be quite exhausting as well with that Mercury with the mind. And it's where we're searching for truth. So we're doing that collectively at the moment. Humanity is trying to search for truth, but also we're being told a lot about the misinformation, which shuts people down, and then people have to go to their own people that understand them. So it's like information is being siphoned off in different ways because of what's been going on. And then we have the Mars square Jupiter, and this can cause reckless and extreme reactions. And again, that's going to be going on for some time because that Mars is going to go retrograde and then it will square Pluto again as it goes through. Saturn square Uranus, it's about responsibility, but it's also where people can have no principles. And that we can see this going on in the collective through leadership and stuff like that. It's very interesting in the world we live in. Like, you know, people are chosen to run the show, and then we have to go along with rules and regulations. And people are coming up with their own ideas of foods and stuff like that, and money as well. The CB, central bank digital coin, what's going on there. There's another system that I've heard about, which is called BRICS, BRICK. No, not BR. So it's to do with Brazil. It's a currency that's been looked at. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So I don't know a lot about that, but I've been watching information and learning about different aspects of understanding and putting two and two together in my own mind. But again, what my opinion is and what somebody else's opinion of what's going on is all going to be quite subjective as well. So I've always looked at this Neptune sextile Pluto. So Neptune, if you look here, is sextile to Pluto. And I've seen that as quite a supporting thing. I mean, so Pluto does move a bit faster than Neptune. So that's catching up now. It's moving on out, but we've got another retrograde going on, and then it will move on out. But I do think there's some support there because it's a long lasting and it affects peace-making attitudes. So let's have some faith that there can be peace. It's very difficult when we're watching existentially what's going on. It can affect us. It can raise our heart rate and it can cause a lot of stress, which affects the immune system. So we'd be better not to be careful of what information we're taking in. But it's at the same time not to be ignorant that there is stuff going on that's very unpleasant as well. And then also community, which is at Mars in Gemini, which is going on. It's directing us to look at our community and to be directive in that way as well. You know, what's going on in our community? How can we help each other? The nodes square Saturn, you know, the nodes, big thing in evolutionary astrology are the nodes when they square Saturn, or the nodes squaring any planet, basically. So the node you see here is square to Saturn. And if I read that definition, the node square Saturn, the positive aspect is where we are forced in overcoming our challenges. So we're being forced to overcome our challenges, and we've got a lot of challenges being human collectively. It's where we can be consistent and aware of our responsibilities and walk tirelessly along the path. And I'm amazed how many people have just kept going and even begun to look after themselves, their own mental health, their own diets and nutrition, and find out resources of how to care for themselves and people they love. It's also where we can have very high standards and set ambitious goals and overcome our own limits. The difficult side of this aspect, because there's also the duality of the stuff that goes on, the higher and lower octaves. It can make us pessimistic, or feel hopeless about overcoming our life challenges. And that it can be where we feel like our lives are full of obstacles and that we're afraid to cross the threshold to become ourselves. And that there's going to be people in society that are experiencing that. And that's not because they are negative or that there's something wrong with them. It can be that there can be a real reality where it's very difficult for people. If we look at the war zone at the moment, there are things going on that people are not purposefully feeling negative about. It's been put upon them and they're having to deal with something. And that's not taking sides either. That's just the reality of being human. There are things going on, for instance, like child abuse. A child can't walk out of an abusive situation. They're stuck in it. So it's not about, and then there may be older people that, are struggling with their health issues and they're too afraid to go and get help at doctors or whatever. There's so many different issues, addictions as well, where people are addicted and they not able to get the help, or they're not ready to take the step into health and well-being. And this is part of being human, that people go through these things. The node conjunct Uranus. So the aspects I like here are that sextile, Pluto sextile Neptune, and the node conjunct Uranus is where it gives us a desire to search for new original ways of dealing with the challenges in our lives. And this is where it's the development of our own individuality, and that's our focal point, the development of our own individuality. Yeah, that's the conjunction, which we've all been going through collectively together. The difficult side of this aspect is that we want to live the way according to our own rules. So we can be too one way, it's like I want to be so individuated that I'm going to only do things my way, which can also become dogmatic. It can leave a gap between independence and freedom, and that we're facing challenges that are very difficult for them to concentrate on what's really important. So where would that be? A war zone. It would be very difficult to concentrate on what's really important, because the most important thing would be, that you need to eat and survive. So I'm bringing that in because it really is important, because these things can happen to anywhere in the world and to anybody. We don't know, how things are going to go exactly. So let's take this chart a bit forward. I'm going to go forward by weeks, and then we'll see on the 8th of November, which is 2 weeks away. You can see up here now, the 8th of November, this will be the lunar eclipse. And what's very interesting is that lunar eclipse, if I actually take that degree, and we're going to go by hours, I'm going to show you. So see the moon is going to be opposite the sun, and that's at 18 degrees. I'm going to look closely here. So these glasses are actually for reading at distance, so I get a bit confused. Not confused, but what I need to do is get a set just for my laptop work, so I can read and look without having to take my glasses on and off. But anyway, that's something I'm looking forward to. So if we look at this, the 8th of November, is this at 16 degrees? If we look at the sun will be in Scorpio at that time at 16 degrees, and that's 16:03. So what we would do is we'd be going back an hour. So that's 16 degrees. So it's 16 degrees, and it's then that moon fantastically. How wonderful is that, really? I'm not doing that chart today, but whether it's wonderful or not is something else, because the moon on Uranus is full of, it can be quite shocking. But that is not particularly a bad thing. We've got the moon conjunct the node. So we've got a conjunction of that lunar eclipse opposite the sun. So this is quite fascinating. We'll have a conjunction of the south node and the Mercury conjunct the sun, conjunct Venus, all up there. Venus is our needs, our inner needs. The sun is who we are. The Mercury is communication. The south node is the past. I will look at those aspects more clearly on a video in 2 weeks for that. But seeing this here, and then we've got that square going on here, because that will mean that the Uranus, the moon, and the node are all square to Saturn, which is restriction, and the moon square to Saturn is not a walk in the park. But these tensions can create open new doors for us, create a new doorway into something else. So monetary, this looks like, because it's our food resources, and it's monetary and farmland, and it's our inner values and inner needs in Taurus. And this up here is what's hidden as well. Psychology, the Scorpio. So the 2nd and 8th house, the nodes are really important in an eclipse situation, because the nodes are what define this. So the 2nd and 8th houses, so an eclipse in the 2nd is ultimately to do with money. It's what we own or owe, and it's also to do with our hands, like if we use our hands to grow food and exchange money as well. It's to do with, there could be a crisis, that it could shake us. And also it's financial possessions as well, this node here. So we're talking about the node. I was born with the North Node in Taurus at 25 degrees. So I understand that North Node in Taurus, and I understand my South Node. And the nodes are about integration. Often in spirituality and in circles, and even in trauma circles, people will say, oh, just let it go. It's really just so unhelpful when people use that terminology. We do not just let things go. We do not just forgive. We integrate stuff over time, and we begin to integrate an understanding, and our perception changes about things, and wounds heal. Some don't, some need a constant reevaluation of where we're at, particularly with complex PTSD issues. People may have a trigger that comes up. I am studying clinical hypnosis, and one of the reasons I'm doing that is to help people who have those types of traumas. My exam will be on the 5th of August next year. And I'm studying this because I do think that the mind is very powerful, and that we can begin to restructure and look at things in different ways. And we can do that because a lot of our reactions are unconscious. And when with clinical hypnosis, when we look at the unconscious and we talk to the unconscious, that's that time, what all hypnosis is, it isn't magic. It's basically getting into a very relaxed state. So if you consider that when we go off to sleep, that first, I see faces when I fall off to sleep. The first few minutes, I'll see images flash before my eyes, quite close. So input at that point, when we're going into a state of relaxing, I do find this if I'm listening to an audio book when I'm falling off to sleep, Audible, and if I'm listening to a book and I'm going into that sleep state, I can still hear that book, and it's almost like you might begin to see images of what the book's talking about, because your mind is going into, picking up on what's being said. You may have experienced that. So in the 8th house, what we're looking at is heavy energetic price of, we're looking at entanglements, entanglements from the past. We're looking at what's been toxic, and it's where we're looking at our darkest fears, and also we're looking at the death of things. Again, that word, but it's good to look at, because when we look at it, then we can begin to put our own lives into perspective. A new moon, solar eclipse, is a new phase. It's an initiation, a beginning. It's a new cycle. It's instinctual. It's where absolute freedom is required. So when we need freedom, then it is a release of something. We want to be free of something, whatever that is. And then it's like who I am, who am I, who I am, and taking steps to really be who we are. And with the full culmination, it's an attunement, it's an understanding of oneself. So as we go through this process of these eclipses, we're coming to an understanding at the lunar eclipse, and then a releasing of all that has become before that hinders the attunement, the beginnings of imaginings of a new cycle. So I won't read into the houses, because there's going to be 12 there where it's going to fall. I encourage you to look at where that's falling for you. And it's where eclipses can shake us up, and they can turn us, into, or put us on a new path, which is really important. We've had 4 eclipses. We've had 2 previous this year. The dates for those, I will tell you, were April the 30th, 2022. We had a partial solar eclipse in Taurus at 10 degrees. And then on May the 16th, 2022, we had a total lunar eclipse in Scorpio at 25 degrees. That fell on my South Node. That was very defining for me. October 25th, partial solar eclipse, which has happened today at 2 degrees of Scorpio. That was 10 hours ago in the UK. And then November the 8th is the lunar eclipse, which is happening again at 15 degrees of Taurus. I'm going to leave it there. I may have missed some stuff, but I think with astrology, I'll just come back and we'll talk more about it next week. Thanks for watching, and any questions, or let me know what house it's fallen in for you. And I do read charts, so you can book me or talk about, just to talk about complex PTSD and any trauma. I have a ladies group where I do a lot of work over on that complex PTSD issue in a child work on Wednesdays. Catch you later, and thanks for watching.